I'm Marika Timmers, and this is The Ethical Entrepreneur, a speaker series to inspire you to build better businesses. Yesterday, we talked a bit about sales and how it doesn't have to feel slimy, that if you have purpose and meaning and you truly believe in that, then you have a duty to share it with the world. And today, we're talking the other side of sales, about a personal favorite of mine, and that is marketing. But specifically, this relatively new term that's popping up in particular all over my news feeds at the moment, and that is ethical marketing. Now, to discuss whether this is actually just getting us back to basics or yet another baffling buzzword, I'm pretty excited to introduce you all to the best copywriter I've ever met, Monica Shepherd from Mark My Words. Hi, Monica.
Hi, Marika. Thank you for having me.
Pleasure. Now, Monica is a copywriter and a marketing strategist who loves the power that language has to connect, to inspire action or change, to make people think, to ignite an emotion, or to take someone on a journey. With an understanding of SEO copywriting, for those of you in the audience that aren't familiar with SEO, that is search engine optimization, compelling storytelling techniques, persuasion and buyer psychology, she helps purpose-driven brands craft digital content and brand stories that attract her ideal clients. Monica started Mark My Words in 2010 and has worked with organizations from startups to global corporations with a focus on creating high-performing digital content that helps brands sell through connection rather than coercion, while setting their business apart from the rest. So, Monica, ethical marketing. I'm sure it's all over your news feeds at the moment too.
It sure is. Yep.
What's your view on what this actually means for business owners and entrepreneurs?
I think what's important for us to talk about straight off the bat is that there's not really a template or a framework. It's not about ticking boxes. And to be honest, as a marketer myself, I don't think that marketing ethically is something I really want to hang my hat on, because ethical marketing is really should be like what's expected of us.
Yeah, it's marketing, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's the norm. It's I guess it's about the philosophy that guides your decisions. I mean, having good checks and being really clear on those things for accountability is good, but ultimately it's kind of about being guided by a set of values.
Yeah.
And I guess, like the advertising standards or whatever, we've got those kind of things that tell us what we should be doing. So, being truthful, being honest, being respectful, being socially responsible, being legal, all those things are just things that we should do. But I guess the discussion point is really what matters to us as a business specifically. And I guess that's where getting really clear on your own values is actually so important. What is the ethos behind your brand? What's your purpose? What impact do you want to have? And I think recognizing that every engagement, every touch point, every conversation, every piece of content you put out in the world does say something about who you are, what you believe in, and what people should think about you as a brand. So ethical marketing, it's less around just saying, well, I've checked those boxes, but more about really critically thinking what matters to us as a brand, what matters to our customers. They're increasingly using their purchasing power to buy from brands whose values align with their own, right? So, and I guess maybe that's why this term ethical marketing has kind of come a little bit to the fore, because we're looking for ethical sourcing, we're looking for ethical practice, ethical working environment. So why not have, ethical marketing as well? But actually, what it's really about is just kind of doing the right thing for us as a brand. And sure, there's definitely tactics that I would say would fall under unethical practice, but really when you are very aligned with your brands, that kind of ethical marketing should really just happen.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And it's subjective, right? Because what I view to be ethical behavior is shaped by the experiences that I've had in my life. So what works for me is not necessarily what works for someone else, and vice versa.
Yeah, and I think ultimately it comes back to intent behind the behavior as well, right?
Absolutely.
And thinking really, again, thinking critically around the impact that something has on your consumer. So if you are presenting a message or, you know, communicating in a certain way that is going to influence behavior, then what is that influence? What is the impact for that person? Is it going to cause harm? So while there might be discussion around, I think, ethical and unethical tactics, I think as a brand, it's over to you to consider what you consider ethical and unethical because of your own motives and the own outcomes for your consumers as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's about that intention. If your intentions are pure, then the tactics will be.
Yeah.
You know, and along with that, obviously, comes transparency and authenticity for the brand as well. So, if those are your values, surely they just need to permeate through everything you do, not just marketing.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So a lot of us have probably seen The Social Dilemma as a marketer. None of it was actually that surprising. Scary, but sadly not surprising.
Yeah.
What are some other examples of unethical marketing tactics that you've seen, and how do you think those could be reworked in a more ethical manner?
Yeah. So I guess one of the really prolific things that we've seen given rise to is what's been dubbed bro marketing. And just to be clear, it's not men who are guilty of this. It's just kind of a term that's been given to this kind of ego-driven marketing. So put simply, it's I guess using marketing tactics or language that would demean, shame, guilt, or coerce someone into purchasing something. So I guess it's trying to control someone else's narrative so that control their narrative with your own messaging, instead of actually getting a really clear idea about who that customer is, what they need, and therefore what can best support them. And so I guess meeting them where they are with that messaging in a way that positions your product or service in a more supportive way, one where they actually feel more in control of that decision to choose you. So there's no shaming, there's no pressure, there's no guilting into making a decision. Quite often we see content that actually really triggers quite negative consumption behaviors, and that's driven by someone feeling FOMO or insecure or that kind of perceived sense of lack. And I think that, for a lot of us, that means actually undoing a lot of the conditioning that we've had around sales. The scarcity approach, like last chance, buy now. It's all the stuff that you learn, right, when you're kind of going through this process. And they're all the things that we kind of consider to be effective at selling. And I guess it's going back to what we were just talking about, right? It's not necessarily not doing them, but actually really thinking about beyond your own brand, what impact that kind of messaging does have. So if you are using scarcity, perhaps putting context around that, like why is there scarcity? Is it because there's limited capacity or capability within your business, or are you just literally doing that because you want people to be forced into making a decision? So it's kind of coming back again to that intent, because our role as marketers is to help people make the right decisions for them. And I think that's where some people get it wrong, right? Is that we're trying to make someone make a decision because it works for us. We want to sell stuff, but we have to get back to really digging into what motivates our clients, what drives them, and then actually speak into those ways that we can support them in achieving their ambitions, and even understanding, how choosing us might actually harm them, and making sure that we craft messages that align with that, rather than kind of forcing them into making decisions that actually aren't truly beneficial for them.
I mean, it's a good example, that scarcity one, I think, and this goes back, it's complex, right? And it does go back to your values and to that context. That context is really important. So hands up, I'm using scarcity in this series, and I'm using it because these interviews are only available for 48 hours. That's not to force you to buying the VIP package. It's to create momentum and to create energy in the group. If you were sitting in the event and it was at a live event, you wouldn't even have it for 48 hours. So 48 hours is actually quite a long period of time. So it's really important, like Monica said, to go back to those values, because there is, you always have to look at it in terms of context and, and that intention. If the intention is to create urgency for yourself and to get people to buy out of fear or FOMO or loss, then probably not ethical. If the purpose of it and the intention behind that is purposeful, then it's a tactic that I would say go for it. There are tactics I would say don't ever do, things like clickbait.
And
we lost you for a minute there.
Sorry about that.
What were you saying?
I was saying that luckily we have kind of moved on from those early days of black hat tactics that they used to use in SEO. So all the backlinking and terrible stuff like that. So luckily we've kind of moved on from some of that, which I think was definitely an example of some pretty unethical marketing behavior now, and people taking advantage as well of other people's ignorance, unawareness as well when it came to search engine optimization. But there was another thing, and I guess that's probably something that this audience would relate to as well, and that's around greenwashing. And I know that for like a lot of the clients, the brands that I work with who are legitimately working in this space around sustainability and more eco-conscious businesses, that they are very, very conscious about how they use terms or make claims. But they're also quite aware of how brands outside of the space or who would like to be in the space are using those terms more liberally and potentially misleading customers. So I think, again, like that, the language we choose has to be very considered, very precise when we're making claims around brand integrity, product integrity, or sustainability and stuff as well. And I think that's increasingly becoming quite an issue. And I don't know, maybe as consumers, I like to think that we're also getting a little bit more clued up around that, but I think that it is quite easy to be misled, again, because you don't know, right? It's just you think you're doing the right thing, and I think ultimately everyone wants to be doing the right thing or something, making a better choice, but we just don't quite know necessarily how accurate some of those claims are. And probably to add to that, I mean, virtue signaling in general is something that I think brands need to be aware of. As brands, we have a choice and, perhaps even a responsibility to amplify certain messages. But I think that we have to be quite careful to not use that as like to leverage social issues in our marketing. So that's, that's the difference, I think, between being aware and being woke. And at the end of the day, again, it comes back to those values. How are we showing through our behavior and our choices and all the other decisions we make in our business, the things that matter to us and the things that we believe in. When it comes to having those conversations and discussing social issues or conversations, that we're not just like, suddenly jumping onto this and like because we're woke and trying to leverage the current climate. I think was it Pepsi who did that ad or whatever, and they got it really wrong with like one of the Kardashians. But anyway, I think our audiences are a little more like aware of that kind of stuff as well. So
for sure.
When you communicate about your intentions and you align with those intentions, then that's ethical marketing. So it's not just like jumping on and trying to virtue signal because it suits you as a brand.
Yeah, really good point. One other that came up recently for me, and I was hoping that this was, again, old school, not happening anymore, but apparently not. fake testimonials and fake followers. So
Yeah.
it's been brought to my attention recently from a client of mine who decided to trial a fairly large platform, distribution sales platform, that there were organizations that were set up purely to help businesses create fake testimonials and followers. That's not a big surprise, but actually those same organizations also can purchase your product in some of these channels,
right,
and then send them back and give negative reviews to drive your traffic down.
Oh, no way. Yeah, well, that's, I mean, and isn't it scary? And it's hard, right? Because as a small business, you're just like trying to do the right thing. And actually, funny you mentioned that, because I have noticed a lot more conversation around, you know, the conversation has been around business coaches, and I don't quite know why, and I'm not making any kind of accusations there myself, but around people promoting their own income and saying, well, I can help you make this money too. But there not being any real transparency around, they're not talking about profit, they're talking about, you know, that's before all the expenses come out, and misleading people into thinking that they can, you know, achieve these same goals. And again, what's coming into it is not actually having any social proof. So not having testimonials and having people saying, well, yeah, actually I did actually achieve what you said I could do. So they're making these claims and actually not having genuine testimonials or evidence or metrics or anything that back up these claims. And I think as consumers we need to get savvy to that as well, right? So when we see claims, to go, actually we do need to do our research here, because there could be some like business somewhere pumping out fake testimonials. Who knew?
And there are.
Yeah, I mean, I knew that followers thing was going on, but again, it's not really like in your face. You know, if you've got 10,000 followers and on your social media account, and none of them are actually interested in what you sell, if they're just fake accounts, there's going to be no engagement. You're actually not selling to an engaged audience. I'd rather have 2,000 than 20,000, but know that those 2,000 are actually really interested in what I have to say and sell.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
So that whole metrics thing as well, right, is
I mean, the model of this business was clearly the most unethical model I've ever come across, because their strategy was, let's buy the product and drive down their sales by giving negative reviews or sending them back. And then we'll target them as a potential client to help increase sales by giving them, fake testimonials.
Terrible.
Yeah.
I guess,
And that's the other thing, do your due diligence on these platforms that you're on as well, because these things happen, and it takes a while for those platforms to catch up with that kind of activity as well.
Yeah, and that's it. And I think it's important to always remember what things as a brand you can control. So, if you have an email database, that's yours, until someone decides to leave it, but you own that. We don't own our social followings. If we give our data to these other platforms, what are they, what's happening with it? How can they leverage it themselves? So I think, remembering, there's all these amazing different tools, right, for reaching new audiences in different channels. But at the end of the day, what data can you own? Because if that all got taken away from us, like, what have you got? So that's important.
Yeah, for sure. And if you're looking to sell your business, that's of value. Yeah. So we you briefly mentioned earlier, that there is no set guideline. There are rules and regulations. There are laws in place, and they differ in every jurisdiction. So if each company is setting their own guidelines, what should they be considering as part of their code of conduct?
I do think that the onus is on us as brands to uphold our own standards, but I don't think today's audiences will hold back in keeping us accountable either. So So while I don't think you can, I mean, there's not a set of rules, but again, I think it comes back to what matters to you. In saying that, I think that there are certainly things that brands today should prioritize, things like diversity and accessibility in their marketing. Too often these are afterthoughts. So, someone shouldn't have to ask for you to caption your videos for the deaf or hard of hearing. As brands, we should be considering the way that screen readers consume our written content. So when we're crafting website copy or social media copy, and it's on us to consider those. So we can't expect someone to come and tell us how to do this. We have to educate ourselves. We have to learn before someone asks or before we get called out for it. And the same goes for diversity, right? So I think that many brands had a very swift lesson with the whole, with the conversations around Black Lives Matter. They had to have a really good look at their own diversity and representation in their own business. And again, this shouldn't be an afterthought, or it shouldn't be tokenism. And I think it's important to remember that diversity and inclusion are actually different. So it's not enough to just have people with different colored skin or different ethnicities on your website and say that you're diverse, right? You need to actually have messaging that supports conversations with all sorts of diverse audiences. You need to hire with diversity in mind. You need to have input from a diverse audience when it comes to product development. So again, it's just coming back to that intent, right? It's not about checking a box. It's actually, if you're doing these things in your business, then your market, it becomes an intrinsic part of your marketing in the way that your brand communicates. And I talk about this as well when I talk about customer personas. So, traditionally we've set up personas and they include certain demographics, right? But actually what really matters is people's values, what motivates them, what's driving the decisions, what are they worried about, what are they trying to achieve? Because a 50-year-old man from the Waikato and a 20-year-old female from Auckland's North Shore could actually have the same values, same motivators, same desires, but those demographics are actually really different, right? And you can actually it makes some dangerous assumptions, I guess, when you start to pigeonhole people with things like religion, how much people earn, where they live. If you come back to those values, those motivators, then your messaging becomes much more effective in actually reaching the right people, because you're speaking into the things that matter to them, and your language becomes much more inclusive because you're not excluding anyone through demographics. So I think those are important. What else would I say? Coming back actually to basics around your brand voice. So figuring out what words as a brand do we use and do we not use? So what do we not find acceptable? What would we not like our brand to reflect? What words would make someone feel marginalized or excluded or disempowered? How are we communicating in a way that's probably not quite inclusive for our community? Or where are we allowing ableist language to come in? So all these things that should just be an intrinsic part of the way that your brand communicates. We know that our world is a very diverse and beautiful place, so we need to be communicating in a way that caters to that diverse audience.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's kind of the whole demographics piece when people talk marketing, and I get this with my clients too, and I say, first of all, who you're targeting. First answer is always everyone.
Yeah.
Not true. Second answer is always the demographics, and to
be fair, there are some brands where that will be very clear, right?
Yeah, and it's still a useful way of segmenting your audience, because you cannot be marketing to everyone, but it's those psychographics, that matter the most. It's the attitudes, the opinions, the interests. And with digital marketing as it is these days, we can absolutely segment our audiences with all of those things.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
So over the year, sorry,
did
you add to that? No? Over the years, you mentioned advertising standards earlier, and over the years we have seen the role of government become much more involved in some of these marketing standards to protect consumers.
Yeah.
There are obvious laws around misleading statements, advertising standards, general deception.
Yeah.
But a couple of years ago, the General Data Protection and Compliance Standards, the GDPR, were brought into effect in Europe, and that actually freaked a lot of marketers out. It really set a new standard for email and data practices worldwide, and anyone in the audience who is marketing via email to European customers, hopefully you are familiar with the GDPR. If you're not, go and look it up or let me know. I'm happy to share any information with you. Monica, should we be expecting more legislation around marketing, or do you think, like you said earlier, consumers are actually naturally pretty savvy and natural selection will win out?
Yeah, I mean, it was a good thing to see in New Zealand, at least. I don't know about everywhere else in the world, but the standards around influencer marketing and being transparent around when something is an advertisement and transparency around their relationship with their brand. I definitely think that's a good move. And I'm sure as our use of social media and online platforms continue to change, that legislation obviously probably will need to come to meet to that too. But again, I think as brands and as industries, we need to be committed to upholding our own standards and keeping ourselves to account, keeping others to account. And ultimately our consumers are going to speak with their dollars. But it'll be interesting to see as things evolve, right? Because pretty much, I mean, most brands everywhere are leveraging digital channels, especially, right, to market. So yeah, that whole data piece is obviously so critical. And then what does happen with that? Who owns it? Where does it go? There's so many things that I guess as brands we don't really consider when we just suddenly put our content out for everyone.
Yeah. And like a lot of these things, we can't wait for the legislation to catch up with that technology.
Yeah, I do. And that's the thing, right? And this is what I guess this conversation is about, is actually it has to be led by someone, and we can't wait for someone to tell us the rules before we start doing right and doing right by our brand, doing right by our consumers. And I think, that's why we're having this conversation as well, right? Is that it's our responsibility as brands.
Yeah, for sure. So I think we've got time for one last question, and it's a question the audience are very familiar with by now. Now, you've been in business on your own for over a decade now. So if you can think back to, 10, 11 years ago, when you were just starting out, if you knew then what you know now, what would you do differently?
So many things. I think one of the big things for me would be actually putting systems, processes in place, good ones, from day one. When you start out, you're kind of winging a lot. You don't have a big budget. You're just figuring things out. But actually, man, it's such a headache to go back and try and fix up some of those things or retrofit things to fit systems. If you've got it all in place from the start, it's so much easier to scale and to grow rather than trying to go back and figure it all out, or like try and connect this hodgepodge of different systems that you've got going on. So and I mean, there's amazing technology now, right? And as for marketing automation and that as well, there's some great tools that you can use. So kind of really thinking to the future. I mean, 10 years ago, there wasn't quite the systems that we have access to now, I will say that. I am quite jealous of some of these brands who appear online. But I was actually having this conversation with someone the other day because, you might be similar, where, my brand, I built it in a time before social media, and that was actually really effective for brand marketing. And while I'm slightly jealous of some of these brands who can, amass a huge following very quickly on social, I'm actually grateful for the groundwork that I did in terms of relationships in those early days. And all that stuff really that's got longevity, right? Those kind of relationships. And And yeah, so that's something I wouldn't change. I wouldn't go back and change that opportunity to get out, to meet people, to go to those blimmin' speed dating, networking, business event things and meet people. And that, but that's how you learn, and connected with so many different people. So
when we're not in lockdown, right?
Yes, of course. Yeah. But, even then I was saying to someone that throughout, our initial last year in 2020 with those first lockdowns, that actually what I think carried me through was a lot of those business relationships. And not just for work, but also, to have other people to lean on who are in a similar situation, right? So
because it can be lonely building a business on your own.
Yeah.
So you've got a free resource for our audience today. Do you want to share what that is?
Yeah, so and I touched on it earlier around building those inclusive personas. So I've got a worksheet that people can download with a little bit of information around how they can work through building inclusive personas for their own brand. And do you want me to share the link, or will you put that up?
I will put the link somewhere here.
Here it is.
Here it is. Thank you so much for that freebie, Monica. Get your hands on that. And thank you also for your time, for joining me today in this chat. I always love our chats.
Yes, I feel like there's so much we could talk about. It's hard to fit it all into one conversation, right?
Yeah, bite-sized interviews these are. I'm sure everyone else here today has learned a lot from you as well. So how proficient are you with your marketing? Are the points we raised today things you've already considered? For me, the most important thing to remember is that we are all also consumers. And so we need to put ourselves in our customers' shoes when we're designing our communications and our promotions. My view is that yes, you need to educate yourself on the rules and the regulations, but ultimately, as the leader of your business, you get to define the codes of conduct. What does ethical marketing mean to you? I would love to hear. I'll see you back here tomorrow with another exceptional ethical expert. See you then. Thanks, Mon.